not sure. Oh yeah, I get the little spinny ball thing. Cool. All right, this is April 23rd, third cartography meeting. This is going pretty good so far. I'm going to go ahead and share the minutes documents just to kind of do a little bit of quick housekeeping. And okay, let's go take a look at this real fast. All right, is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so kind of the things that I had on the agenda that I wanted to talk about today real fast was to go quickly over the things we did in the past month, the work that's currently in progress, and then give opportunity for people to raise other issues or PRs, and then at the end give some more open discussion about anything where I'll go ahead and turn the recording off, that kind of thing. And then, of course, before I get into before I get into like the formal agenda, I wanted to ask if anybody has any show and tell, just on the off chance. I know that nobody posted in Slack, but I just wanted to ask, like, just in case to make time. All right, doesn't seem like it, but yeah. So if there's ever any so if you ever want to go and show off something you've been working on and get some feedback or input from the rest of the group, we're pretty flexible. This is just, like I said before, this is just a place for all of us to hang out and talk about all things cartography, how we're using the project, what we're improving and fixing in the project, and where we want to take it. And so I'll dive in real quick. I'll try not to take too much time on my little monologue thing over here where this past month, we actually got quite a bit done. This is pretty exciting. So we've got a roadmap document. I'm not going to go and look too much into this, but I encourage you to read through this document because it goes through all of the plans that we have for 2020 in cartography, basically breaking things out into use cases and the things that we can do, the things that we're not so good at doing, and then a list of different projects we have in different milestones. Very excited about some of the work, a lot of the work that's going to be on here, things like improving performance and then adding new capabilities. So, and then if you have your own projects that you have in mind, I highly encourage you to add a comment here and then go and mark yourself as the champion for that feature or improvement. So that's that. That's the roadmap. Feel free to add that in there. And in terms of features and issues that got merged, we had a lot of good ones. So we have Marco went and added in support for AWS EKS. Oh, this GK. Why did I say AWS GKE? It's actually all right. Anyway, so GKE, and then I added in support for AWS tags, which is pretty neat because now you can ask yourself, because a lot of organizations, at least here at Lyft, we tag a lot of our assets, and that is the way that we can identify things such as like if they contain different types of information. Had this other PR about supporting the Boto 3 AWS profile environment variable, which helps a lot with those of you who are running it as a CLI tool and you don't want to sync all of the accounts in your AWS profile. You want to like maybe pick just one of the accounts to sync. So that's pretty helpful. This is a big one too, having observability via statsd. So you can, with a command line switch, you can go ahead and say statsd is enabled, and then it will it will time all the method executions and then send that over to a statsd server so you can identify bottlenecks in the sync, and hopefully we can improve performance from there on. In terms of work currently in progress, Andrew's working on IAM. So Andrew is working on a very significant overhaul on AWS IAM. So being able to map like different actions to AWS assets. And we can do a little bit of a deep dive shortly also after Andrew. I'm working on DAGs, directed acyclic graphs. There's a little PR for a proof of concept that I've been working on. And so the idea here is that currently the sync runs in serial. So you have like AWS sync and then the GCP sync. And then so what happens is that if there's a failure at any point in this chain, it will just completely crash the whole sync and you'll get like nothing. Well, DAGs let us kind of break the sync out into different data dependencies. And so you can even have them run in parallel with each other. And so this proof of concept, I've shown that I'm able to run AWS and the GCP sync in parallel. So this can significantly cut down the sync time. Of course, where I'm at with that is like there's some nuance about being able to, there's some nuances with the refactor itself. So there's like some glue code that needs to happen, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and this is a fix that is currently in progress that Marco was helping me validate just earlier today was for AWS regions. So there are certain regions that I recently learned in AWS where you are not default enabled on them, or they require opt-ins such as AP Asia 1. And so if you are not opted into that, and then if you try to perform a query on that region, it will throw an Boto3 will throw an exception, and then it'll be not very happy. And so we've been trying to deal with that. We can go talk about that a little bit more. And before I dive into any of those topics, though, I wanted to ask, like, are there any? I'll let the group go and take point on the discussion now in terms of what issues or PRs or any other things that anyone here would like to raise. Because if not, then I'll turn it over maybe to Andrew. Are you there?
I am here.
If not, then maybe we can, if you wanted to, maybe we can talk a little bit about IAM.
Sure. I can certainly go over it.
Sure.
Let me just pull up this real quick.
I'll stop presenting and then maybe you can present. Do you want to, or?
Yep, I'll present. Okay, should be popping up. So I sent this out in the open source Slack channel and got quite a good amount of feedback. But I have implemented most of this feature. It is in code review right now, so there's a PR out for it. There's really two parts to it. In cartography, we were pulling in a lot of IAM information. So roles, policies, groups, users, but we weren't linking them correctly. In addition, there's a couple caveats to IAM, things like inline policies versus managed policies, and all of this makes IAM pretty complicated. So the first step in this whole feature was to map all of just the IAM nodes correctly. So that's this first graph. If I zoom in a little bit. So currently we brought in all of these things and we mapped users to groups, but we didn't map anything else in IAM. So really the big improvement is now that that the new sync, once this is all through, will actually bring in AWS policy statements. So you will get the meat of the actual policy that enables access in AWS. And we map everything now correctly together. So we weren't bringing inline policies in. So for Lyft, this was a huge miss because most of our policies are inline policies. We were bringing in managed policies, but we weren't linking them to anything. And now everything has the statements. So that's really the first part of this whole effort, is to just bring in IAM as is and link it all together. So even once cartography has all of that, we still have two separate worlds. We have AWS resources and IAM policies, and we don't link any of those together. For one, it's a huge combinatorics problem, which is why this feature has been taking a little bit longer. So for one, if you read the policy evaluation logic on AWS's website, it's obviously, again, quite a flowchart of how a request actually comes in, but Amazon does not keep this pre-computed, right? So this is one of the first attempts that I know of to pre-compute some of them. So what happens in AWS when a request comes in, it goes through this logic with the request, finds out who's making that request, what action is required for that request, and then goes through his decision tree as to whether or not it's allowed or denied. So we want to add some of those into cartography. So that's sort of the goal number 2, is mapping permissions to resources. And we're creating what we call a resource permission relationship. And so we certainly can't map across all permissions. You know, S3 alone has some 50 something actions that you can take against S3, and most of those are not important to us. And then furthermore, you can have tons of IAM principles, you can have tons of resources, so we just can't map every permission from every IAM principle to every resource. So we're going to be selective. And that's where we're going to allow people to create their own RPRs, resource permission relationships, between nodes. So if you are worried about who can read your S3 buckets, then you can create an RPR that will map AWS principles and the get objects permission to an actual bucket. And we're providing these 3 out of the gate, but you can, in the PR, you'll see that you can create your own relationship file and add all of those in. Furthermore, we want to be able to abstract some permissions. So I would make the claim as a red teamer that if I have any of these 4 permissions, batch, get item, get record, or query on DynamoDB, I can get data out of DynamoDB. So we abstract all of that into one relationship called canQuery. So if canQuery exists, it can do one or all of these 4 permissions against that particular one. So it took a while to get originally these were taking about an hour per each because there's a whole bunch of combinations we have to test out. We've gotten it down to about 3 or 4 minutes to calculate one of these on Lyft's pretty large graph. Smaller graphs will certainly be a lot quicker, but we hope that people can start adding these in and really looking at which permissions individual things have against their one. The 2 main use cases for Lyft, if we knew that something was breached, an S3 bucket's been having weird access logs or something like that, we can then go see who the possible principals are that are doing that. Conversely, if we know that a principal has been breached, someone stole a key or has impersonated a user, we can see what our critical assets are that they can then access after that. I think that's kind of it. It is in code review. I certainly should take a look. It's quite a big feature change, but are there any questions on any of that? Any suggestions?
I have a question about the managed policies. So managed policies, does that encompass both AWS built-in policies as well as like custom policies that you have developed yourself?
Yes, it does include both. I write it down in here. For one, yeah, so we will only bring in policies if they're in use. So we didn't want the case where you have a brand new AWS account and you run cartography. Now we have to pull in every single AWS built-in policy and map all the policy statements for that when they don't matter. If you're not using the policy, if it's not attached to any principle, it's not in use. So yes, we do bring in managed policies, but only the ones that are actually in use.
Gotcha, that's cool.
Can you go over the RPR logic a little bit?
Like how? Sure.
Yeah, going down to that diagram that you had. Yeah, so
right.
Yeah, so like if you're to map this principle to this S3 bucket, what is that computation that happens?
Yeah, so the way cartography syncs in AWS, it does it account by account. So the first step is to get all principals in the account. Then we need to, that's why you have to specify the resource type. we'll get all S3 buckets in this particular one that are in that account. Then for each of the principals, we have to get all of the policy statements and then check which ones of those policy statements, again, following AWS's evaluation logic, can actually access that resource. There are some caveats called out at the top of the spec. We do not yet have resource policies. That is our number one priority after this. So for things like S3 buckets, you can either add a resource policy to the bucket, or you can grant access to that bucket to an IAM principal. This is the latter. There's also, IAM is extremely malleable. So permission boundaries and session policies are all extra things you can put on top of IAM that we will not have mapped in yet, but we will try and get them in. We do map conditions in the policy statements, but we don't yet evaluate them just because permission evaluation is going to be extremely tricky. So there'll be some false positives. It's possible that we create a can-read relationship when some restriction is not actually allowing that, but we still want to know about it, that it could be allowed under certain circumstances.
Gotcha. So the S3 bucket is already in there. The permission for S3 get object, is that something in the RPR sync that is getting retrieved again? Where is that permission found? Is it embedded on the S3 bucket node, or is it in the embedded on the AWS principal node, or do you have to query for that?
So the permissions are all part of the statement.
Okay.
So a policy statement has the actions that it can do. It also has not actions, the actions it's explicitly not allowed to do. So we just check across those which are the actions that can do it, while also not being specifically denied.
Okay,
so if you put a specific deny in, then obviously you don't have access.
Gotcha. The computation of all of this stuff is based off of stuff that is already in the graph by this point. Okay.
Correct. So that was the number one step. If you don't like the way RPRs work, the data is in the graph to be able to compute this. You could certainly write something to compute it yourself or compute it in a different way if you wanted to. So step one is just getting all of the data into the graph that we would need to even make those computations. So hopefully this links two sides of the graph and should allow all of the attack paths that we want to look at should be able to be mapped end to end. So previously we'd already done things like Okta integration, which is needed for Lyft. Now we can go all the way from a user all the way to the resources that they can access. And the next step would be to add in resource policies and then flush out for what does Lyft care about these specific permissions that we want to take a look at, who can do this against our most critical assets.
Pretty cool stuff. But yeah, if anybody else has other, I think if anyone has extra cycles, please do take a look at this spec, take a look at the PR. More eyes is always helpful. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. I'll go look real fast again at the minutes again. No. Okay, so those were the IAM improvements. DAGs, I'm not really going to go over. That's kind of self-explanatory. You can play with that if you want. Marco, I did have a question though about the opt-in stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you played it. Let's see. Let's just get a little bit of context for everybody. Once that finally works. Okay, cool. So again, the context is that we can't sync certain regions because of opt-in, and then I thought that if we queried, there's a way for us to query for EC2 regions that were either opt-in not required or were already actually opted in, but it turns out that you tried it again and it still failed, right?
Correct.
Okay, on both Dynamo and on S3.
S3, yes.
Hmm. Yeah, the thing that I was kind of thinking of was there's probably something in this logic right here with get EC2 regions where maybe there's another field of data in your region that we should be checking for.
Yeah, that's something I can try and instrument that piece and try and print whatever we have there.
Okay.
That's something I can do.
Yeah, if you don't mind, like just maybe
Yeah.
maybe just like do a like dump the object there and then see what
Yeah.
that's like. Maybe there's like something else that we should be checking for. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I was going off of, so this logic I stole from Dan's PR. Yeah, he had a good idea of implementing this. I decided to just take that and then shove it upstream because his was bound to just Dynamo and S3. Okay, yeah, we can go and do that later on.
Yeah.
Let's see. PRs anyone would raise. So automatically identify new accounts and projects.
That's from me.
Marco?
Yeah, that's an idea that we had to complement Terraform drift detection. In our company, we use Terraform for everything, and we already have drift detection for that. But we want to use cartography to raise an alert if someone managed to create a new account or GCP project outside Terraform. So since, at least in our setup, we already give permission to cartography to query at the org level in both AWS and GCP, we already have the capacity to list all the accounts or projects. So what I was considering is to add in at some point, not sure where at the moment, in the Intel side of cartography, a query to list all accounts or projects. So that's something I'd like your input on this, if you think would be valuable or not for your use case.
The GCP projects, I believe, already lists everything, right? I think it does discovery on that, if I recall correctly.
Yes, that's the data for that is there. Then the next step would be to instrument drift detection on that, basically. But for GCP, yes.
I see. Do you actually? I think just to make sure that I understood correctly, you have drift detection running right now, like cartography drift detection.
We have both Terraform and cartography, but what we are missing now is someone manually creates an AWS account. Then we are not picking it up in cartography because we're not telling cartography to analyze that account. So what we could do is put in the graph every account that is under the org and alert when a new node gets added.
Yeah, Alex, I think that was something Evan was trying to. I think we tried to figure that out at Live, right?
Yeah.
So we don't do, and sorry, I'm kind of catching up to the code base, but we don't do the account discovery right now. It's still a manual process.
Right.
Right.
The AWS side is a manual process. The GCP side, project discovery is automated based on your application default credential. But in terms of detecting new ones, that's something that you could potentially use Cartography's existing drift detection feature for. That feature does need a little bit of TLC right now. It needs to be a little polished up, and then we need to verify that everything still works again. But the idea there being that you just set up a query, say match AWS accounts, have it return all your AWS accounts, and then when it'll like generate a file, put it in an S3 bucket or your file system or something like that. And then the next time you run a sync, it will diff this output against the previous output. And then if there's any new ones, it will, it's configurable how you want to alert that. But yeah.
It sounds to me like there's, beyond like the fixing a little bit drift detection, for GCP, that feature should be working now. And then the AWS is the whole challenge of like auto discovery of account based on org, right?
Correct.
And then once that is in there, then drift detection would pick it up.
Right.
Yeah, I was just trying to see, because I'm a little bit sensitive to drift detection, because yeah, there's some change. Hopefully you guys took my branch before I left and poked a little bit of what I was changing there. There is some updates needed, but generally AWS account discovery is like the main thing that I see out of this.
Mm. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, we can. I think that there's value in exploring this also. So Marco, if you want to, feel free to, let's see, would you like to add this to the milestone doc?
Okay. Yes,
And
definitely.
then, you add it to milestone doc, and then we can, we'll work together on it.
Okay.
Alex, do you remember high level why the AWS auto I remember Evan, like somebody else on the project was working on that and kind of scratching his head. Do you remember generally what was the blocker there?
No, I'm gonna have to dig through again. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, it was something where Evan is like super smart. So I remember we hit a block, so we had a PR internally to fix that, and there was some quirks there. I forgot
Oh,
what it was.
yeah. So for us internally, there's a lot of that was a issue of glue code and other things, but let me circle back with you on that. There was something that was very challenging there.
Okay.
We ended up, I forget the reason why, but we actually ended up implementing our own subclass of the Bodle3 session in order to do auto account discovery. And I can't recall the exact reason why, but it was a little janky.
Yeah, let's as you suggest, let's add it to the roadmap, and then that's going to like collectively force us to kind of scratch our head on what was the issue.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like the main item out of this one is automatic AWS account discovery. And so that's one. And then the second one is having a clear story or documentation or a way to get drift detection going for you. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. And sorry, so was someone going to say something?
A quick question. In the roadmap document, I glanced through it pretty quickly. I don't recall seeing mention of how do we transfer existing Intel modules that have not been deliftify back into open source, right? So one of the first one was like GitHub, where we deliftify it. There's a bunch of other ones as well that I know are pretty useful, like Jamf, for example. I think PagerDuty has some usability and so on. Was that considered as part of the roadmap and just didn't meet the bar, or is that something that we should revisit?
It was considered, but didn't meet the bar. In terms of like for the rest of our planning, it just didn't meet the cut line in terms of like all the commitment for all of the other stuff for the year.
Could it be an area where, from memory, I don't recall a case where there's IP, sensitive IP in those modules.
Yeah, there is.
And could we potentially either create a branch? I'm just hypothetically thinking, is like, could that code be shared back to maybe somebody on open source? Could just pick it up and deliftify it, basically meet the engine, convert it from the and I'm guilty of like the super rapid code I did early on, right? So can we share back this code and leave it up to open source to say, hey, this is something that we've had, it doesn't meet the bar anymore, but it's a good foundation. Could somebody pick it up and just finish it, right?
Yeah, that could be an option. There's nothing list specific to certain things. Yeah, for those of you who are unfamiliar, there's some thing before cartography was open source. There were some certain modules such as Jamf, such as PagerDuty that we have running internally at the company, but didn't quite have time to open source it. And then now, yeah, I think that there's value in the PagerDuty one for sure, at least. Yeah.
And this is something you can take internally at Liv. But for example, there's a few of them. If just the code is shared and says, hey, here's a backlog, I might take one or two of them and just finish them.
Yeah, sure.
right? So that might accelerate that. Just some consideration for a roadmap.
Yeah, I am not a lawyer, but I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah, just talk to Martin. I can push my end as well. And squeeze it out, because yeah, I'm just thinking too is like, yeah, there's some IP stuff specifically in analysis job around attribution, right? Like, and that's very specific to Lyft, right? We shouldn't like, anyways, there's no usefulness for other people there, but I'm failing to see like a case where we have like IP sensitive IP in there.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add too is that I'm glad that we're now in this model of, so the old model of open source, the way that it doesn't work well for a lot of companies is that you'll write your own internal module, it'll be this really, really big thing, and then you throw it over the fence and open source when it's ready. Rather than doing like that, we're working from open source in the beginning. And in that way, you know, we can kind of have these more collaborative discussions instead of, you know, just working it behind closed doors. So I think that this new way is a lot more beneficial. Anything else anyone would like to raise up right now? If not, I'll go ahead and then we'll call this like the end of the formal agenda, and then I'll turn off the recording for now.